This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Drinking with Authors, the podcast. I'm your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today is the fantabulous C.R. Rice. And our guest today is D. Lambert. Woo! 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 Okay, they'll add a track.
They add a really cool thing.
It's good. Okay, let's talk about what we're drinking. So I did something fun from our sponsor, Skunk Brothers Spirits. I don't know why I do that. It's terrible. But they have a chocolate cordial that I found this bottle that had yet to be opened. And I mixed it with hot chocolate in my Stormtrooper mug. So yeah, I did that. I'm not sure if it's appropriate. I'm going to find out in a little bit. I haven't tried it yet. CR, what are you drinking?
Got fancy. So I went and have been kind of feeling just like run down today. So I did some Gatorade and vodka. Gotta get my electrolytes back up.
You feel run down.
Yeah, you gotta get your electrolytes back.
Audience listening.
No, it's not.
No. Dee, what are you drinking?
Well, I've got kind of a local flavor because this one is called a French Beach out here, but most people will know it as a London Fog. So this is a tea with my favorite Mama Bear mug that I got as my mom at my baby shower back in the day.
Oh, that's very cool. Oh, I love London Fogs. Yes, we do call that here. So, and by the way, this is amazing. So just
is it good?
It's recommended.
I was wondering, yes, Skunk Brothers, if you're listening, you can mix your thing in hot chocolate. I'm sure they're like, don't do any recipes from Drinking with Authors.
I think we did well with all 3 mugs coming out today. We had a travel mug there as well. So
I'm only allowed to drink out of these.
No glass? Especially not with
No
the
glass.
vodka mix in?
No glass. No. We can be barely trusted to do this podcast, let alone be in charge of glass objects. Just kidding.
Exactly.
Dee, for everybody listening, can you talk about what you write a little bit?
I write fantasy. I started off in the young adult sort of category and then migrated over to a bit more adult. So sword and sorcery style fantasy novels primarily. I throw in the occasional short stories here and there, but mostly, fantasy novel writer.
Very cool. And when did you begin this journey into writing?
I'm one of those people who just likes to keep my brain busy. So I wrote for fun for many, many years. Probably finishing my first story when I was 17. But then I wanted to make it better and better and better. So I spent a lot of time working with writing circles, editing, learning more, going to conferences. But then I started feeling like I needed to take the next step and push for publication. So I published my first book in 2019, and I've now got 5 out currently.
Very, very cool. And your first one, how are you published? Let's ask that question.
Well, my first 3, that's 2019, and they were the young adult series. Those were done self-pub. So I put them together myself. I contracted an artist to do the covers. She did an awesome job. Still love her. And did that one, followed by 2 others, which were a duology. And then I got picked up by the Four Horsemen Publishing last year. It's been just about exactly a year now. And they've taken on my next 2. They're planning to do 6 books in the series, and we're up to number 3 coming out shortly, I believe, in May.
Okay, and what is the name?
Keeping that a solid 6.
Yeah, well, 6 plus. They were, there's a spinoff already on the series that we're aware of, and then who knows? I've got more.
There's so many more. So, what is the name of your first series?
So the first book was just a standalone, and that one's called Dragon's Voice. So it was just kind of introducing the world. I wanted to kind of get a flavor for, were people interested in this world? Was it something that I really wanted to do? And I thought, if it flops, it's a standalone. I'm not going to be heartbroken. So I did that one first. And because it really was well received, and I had a lot of fun doing it, to be honest, seeing those characters come to life and being able to actually talk to people about the characters, coming kind of out of the closet of being a writer, because that's I don't, this is not my day job. So I had to admit to people that I write fantasy novels and my head is sometimes elsewhere, imagining things. But it was very well received. So then I published the next two. That's the Weapons of Espar pair. So there's two. I kind of want to call it a series, but it's just 2 books right now. So, and that's Dragon's Talon and Soulburner are those 2, named after the weapons of Espar.
Very cool. And then the next series.
The next
Or
series,
Harry.
that one is the Son of No Man series, which they tie in because they're all in the same world, the world of, well, the King of Espar and the world of Taint. And they do tie in, but the Son of No Man series, the 6-book plus, right, plus series, that one is sort of a prequel. It's sort of like just telling the story about how the kingdom came about. I wanted to show the story of how the history was really written by the victors in the end. And so the legends that they heard of in the books, Dragon's Talon and Soulburner, these legends, Soulburner making an appearance as well, this is where he comes from. I wanted to show how those legends, well, they were based on a kernel of truth, perhaps, but they had definitely changed over time. So this is the true story of what actually happened. And it's not as legendary, perhaps. It's a lot more dirty, a lot more deceptive in some ways. So it just goes to show how history can be manipulated so much over time.
I think that's such a fantastic premise, actually, when you think about taking the legends and going, okay, let's explain. And they're not legendary legends. Like they're like, this is what actually happened on this thing, which I think is very true for history, period. Rarely, however, histories were, told unless there's video evidence. And even sometimes when there's video evidence, it gets told.
You can fudge video.
It's a little different.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of the fantasy books I've read, the old age was like this, era of magic and amazing things that were, well, we moved beyond, and it's not like that anymore. So it was easy to see how the legends are always bigger, larger than life, because there was more magic and more beasts and just more crazy stuff. But Espar wasn't like that. It just is the same amount of magic. It's just that the story gets inflated and manipulated. A little bit of kind of false news stuff going on, just so that they get the story that they want in the end, and it becomes the legend that everyone believes.
That is very cool. So you built this world. What is your world building like? Do you keep it all on a computer? Because it sounds like you do a lot of thinking and probably adding to this. So what does world building look like for you?
I started with a map. I seriously started with a drawing, and I just put stuff in to start. There's mountains over here. There's a water over there. There's a city on the mountain. I don't know about that. We'll figure it out later. And that's what started that. And then I expanded it as I once my character wandered off the map, I'm like, well, darn, I better come up with a bigger map. And we just had to keep going that way. I try to keep track of everything I have a file. I guess a lot of people call it a story Bible.
Yes.
I've heard that term tossed around, and some people have actual like binders that they're hauling around. Mine is a series of about 2 or 3 files. Each story gets its own version. Although there's some copy and paste when you have multiple characters showing up again. And I'll include things like names and, if this guy's been stabbed and he's going to have a limp, it's the left side or whatever. So I try to keep track of those things. Any facts that I've tossed in, whether it's, the fact that he's got a scar on his right or his eyes are blue or I don't know, anything like that. I toss in there to make sure that I'm consistent with it. And then it's just, names and places. And beyond that, I have a timeline version as well, just to show, because of how much time I covered between the 2 different series, I had to track down, where were you when that was happening? And how long has it been since there? I'm dreading the series plus. I think there's a time travel one coming up eventually. That's going to be trouble. So I needed that timeline one as well. So I just have multiple files on the computer that sort of track all the different bits and pieces. And otherwise jot them down basically as things show up or as needed.
That's very cool. What about when you're keeping track of notes? Because you said you think about stuff. How do you keep track of notes? I have a crap ton of voice memos on my phone. If anybody got a hold of my phone, I'd probably be arrested. And if I'm arrested, somebody please show up and explain what these voice memos are, since I write horror. It's terrible. I'm like, can you disembowel using, it's
like,
I'd be in
please,
so much
please purge
trouble.
my search history, please, because I'm a writer and things come up on Google. Yes, I've done that before. Googling some really inappropriate stuff. I'm sure I'm on a list. But no, I actually have a notes file that's shared between all my devices that I can just pull up. And I'll usually write them down. I don't do voice memos. I did very briefly. I tried it, and I can't stand the sound of my own voice in recording. So it just drives me bonkers. So I just use the note file instead, and it just updates. So.
No, that's very cool. It's interesting. Listening to your own voice, I had that at first, and then I was like, I don't care. I'm just,
maybe I can get over it with practice.
I have to, because I'd be driving and I'd be like, you can't really write a note when you're driving, and your boyfriend can only take so many texts of weirdness. Like, can you disembowel people with a tree branch? Like I scare him sometimes because he's like, what are you writing about? And I'm like, a serial killer who plants people under trees and blah, blah. And I figured out how this fertilizer and stuff. And he's like, backs just slowly out of the room. Like, I think he's covered, but I did have to start going, okay, hit the button, voice memo, that sort of thing. Or reminders. Suri likes to put them a lot in reminders. So I'll suddenly get a reminder, can you disembowel somebody with a tree? And I'm like, copy, note, like.
So it makes you nervous when you cross borders if they're going to check your phone, as you say.
Oh, I'm in so much trouble if any of that happens. My search history, everything, not that as writers, we don't go down rabbit holes. Mine is really, really bad. Like, how long does this kind of poison take to take effect? And can you actually chloroform somebody? And I literally need to be nowhere near any crimes, because I am screwed if I am. Like, just
well, it's a good thing you moved to a
evidence.
mountain. That was,
Yeah.
I feel like the whole thing's premeditated now.
Yeah. Just take a note when I'm around. No, I'm not dumb enough to kill anybody within a couple degrees of separation from me. Watch any amount of Snap, and that's a bad idea. So writing, when you go to read, so I have this question. I am a pantser. I also do not keep a lot of notes, and that's my own situation. So I go back and reread the previous books to go, okay, now I'm ready to start the next one in the series. Have you gone back to reread your books yet at all?
I do. Usually if I'm working on a series, I'll read through the whole thing. Because I wrote them a while ago and I've edited them a lot, I know most of it. The only part I have to go back to is the things that I've changed, because one thing about being a writer and doing it a lot is you definitely learn and you improve and you keep changing things for the better, I hope. So I have to occasionally check and be like, wait, did I change that? Or is that still true? And go back and find it. But I'm usually pretty good on my search and find kind of things. I'll just zero in on the area of interest. I'm a pantser too. I do not plan these. They just show up and just go, and that's fine. But I do try to write things down as they come up. Just so that I'm consistent, especially when you're doing like longer series. If they're standalones, I probably wouldn't bother. I've got a few others in the works that don't have nearly as big of Bibles, but that's because they're only 1 or 2 books at this point. Once you get to 6, trying to make one story out of it, then yeah, I've written down a lot of stuff.
Well, that and these are not tiny books, so I don't write books nearly the size both you and CR write them. They're way bigger. And so if I did that, I'd probably have to be a little bit better at it. But no, I don't. Oh no, that's amazing. And I envy that, but my stories aren't that long. Question, what was it like when you started getting fan interaction for you? So you put that first book out going, will everybody hate this? There you go.
Basically, and it didn't. Yeah. It was surprising. It's
not surprising. You're an amazing author, so that's surprising. But what was it like?
That's the most negative thing I've ever heard. It's like, this was complete shit. I had no idea. No, like I was
hoping it wouldn't be terrible. It was mostly what people would think. It wasn't the book itself. I was pretty sure it was pretty run of the mill. Like it was gonna tick a lot of boxes, and it was a fun story, and I figured it would do fine on its own. It was more of how will people view me when they find out that as a hobby I'm running around with dragons and magical swords, and figuring out what herbal remedies will kill you. I don't do real poisons, but I usually have to use the other ones, the natural remedies. So that I was really worried about because, fun fact, I'm a veterinarian in my day job. So I have a lot of science and logic and all that kind of stuff going on in my day job. But when you turn around and try to turn that into a fantasy novel, I was terrified that people would well, maybe respect me less as a veterinarian if they thought I was that, well, frilly and silly, basically. That didn't happen at all. I've actually had clients come in who are like, hey, I heard you wrote a book. That's awesome. I've had clients come in and be like, can I buy? I actually keep some of my books at my workplace because I get people who ask me for them while I'm, now that you're done with the dog, can you, sign this book? It's been really, really heartwarming. The community is fairly small as well. So once I admitted I was a writer, it was bound to get out and I was going to get questions from it. So it's still embarrassing for me. Like I still flush and I'm still like, oh, I do. It's a bit silly stuff, but I enjoy it and off I go. But it's been they've been so welcoming. People are so excited. I think a lot more people read fantasy than admit it, perhaps. There's an awful lot of people out there who won't go out and say I'm going to buy this fantasy book, but a ton of people are reading them anyway. I'm one of them. Like I wouldn't have admitted as much what I have read, but if you get to when you find those kindred spirits, that's when it kicks in. So I've now done book launches at the local library, and I've been able to chat with people on the streets and at markets and stuff like that. And it's been so incredibly supportive that I'm kind of kicking myself for holding back in the first place.
Well, I think you should, because I think most of the time there might be some different genres where, if you publish an erotica book, they might have been like,
that's a little harder to justify.
They're
a little tamer, thankfully. Although there are some sections.
Yes, but that's not your lead-in line. You're not like
no, the cover doesn't. The cover characters have their clothes on, so we're good.
Yeah. So let me ask you, did you read a lot of fantasy growing up? Were you like a fantasy nerd when you were growing up?
I read a ton of books for a lot of years. I'd plowed through Robert Jordan, and I've done Terry Brooks and Terry Goodkind, and all the main series that were circulating at the time. I had read them all. And what actually happened, the reason I started writing was that I got kind of bored with it. I loved the ideas. I loved the stories and the potential for it. But after a certain point, authors seem to have a tendency of sort of telling the same story, but with different names, perhaps. And you get to see some of their patterns. R.A. Salvador was the worst for this. You're like 3/4 of the way through, somebody's going to think someone else is dead every time. And it became very, very, very predictable. And I got kind of bored. I'd pick up a book and I'd be like, this, read the back. Okay, this, and this is going to happen. And I was right. So I decided to just write my own stuff because I wanted to try something new, and I wasn't finding new stuff. It just felt like we were kind of getting rehatching of the same again and again. And I've heard that said, actually, that if you want to be a writer, if you read, stop. If you haven't read, start. So I think you need a good repertoire of books that you have read, but then once you start writing, tone it down, because I think otherwise you borrow too much from the books you're reading, and you want to be able to be creative and do your own stuff. But you do need to have a balance between reading and writing.
I agree. And I think also, depending on what genre, like if you read a lot of those books, and I read a lot of the ones you're talking about, including Ed Greenwood, like I read all of the TSR, Forgotten Realms, Terry Weiss and Margaret Weiss, and yeah, I read all of those too. And it's really funny because I didn't end up writing fantasy. But
those were the books everything you write.
It doesn't really complement itself very well, but that's okay.
Yeah, it was weird. Well, I did so much gaming and like Dungeons and Dragons games and stuff like that. When I finally sat down to write, that's not what I wanted to write. But when I sat down to write, I had to do some reading into my genre, because I was like, I'm going to write horror. I've always been a huge fan of horror movies and stuff, but I hadn't read a ton of horror books. So I started reading horror books to go, okay, what are they doing? So sort of to your point, I was like, let me see how this works. How do they do the pacing? How do they do reveals? You know, and find that, how do you do that? Because I've seen authors get so incredibly clever that they think they're being so like great at this, hiding this little nugget. And you're like, literally nobody knows what's happening in your book at all. So I don't know what like this super secret stuff you have in your head is, but
it's too secret.
Yeah, it's way too secret. And
you need to have some tension, some trickle out to have the tension build.
Exactly. And so I did that, but I to your point, I've also read, especially in fantasy, a ton of self-published, mainly many years ago, not recently, books that were kind of like the Lord of the Rings or, you know, the Sword of Truth, but it was rewritten. Like you're reading it, you're like, I feel like I've read this. Oh, I know why I feel like I've read this book before, because I have.
It's like the other 12 books that are like it. And I think a lot of, like, when you start, that's the easy thing to do. It's what you're familiar with, and it's a great place to start. It's just not the place to finish.
Agreed. And what's also interesting in that is that a lot of times I think some authors are great at writing books and whatever, but I think the bane of getting trapped into like, you have to write this in this series, and this is like a publisher thing, right? Because at any point in time, I'm proud of Four Horsemen for that. If you're like, I am not feeling this series anymore, I'm going to move to this other thing. You want the freedom where you can read books and series where you're like, how much did they have to, you like, what was the string that they had to write this continued series? I don't know about you guys, but I've read series where I'm like, they're just phoning it in at this point. They're like,
yeah, they've given up on it. They're not really, their heart's not like, behind it. They're just dragging it out, basically.
Or their deadline was too close.
Oh yeah,
like I always feel that way. Yeah, and it's like it starts out really great, and then all of a sudden, so it's like Tina had to get to the end of the forest, but she met the dog, and there was a river, and all of a sudden it ended. She was out of the forest, and it's like, no, wait a second, you definitely skipped a couple steps. Like you could just tell that they ran out of time, and we're like, well, here we go.
And if you get big enough, your name's going to sell the book anyway. So just, you know, the publisher's eager to get it out on a timeline, and they toss it in. Maybe not as. I always laughed about J.K. Rowling and how you had the first book is, you know, whatever, 3/4 of an inch, and the next one's about 3/4 of an inch, and the next one's sort of closer to an inch, and the next one's like, I was like, the editor just gave up. Like, you know, they're like, it doesn't matter anymore. And you can tell by the last couple of books, you're like, there was some stuff in there you probably could have tweaked and improved, but you didn't have to anymore. So the quality kind of slips.
I agree. And I also think if somebody gets a big name, Stephen King talks about this a lot. Like he had an editor on The Cell. I've talked about this on this podcast. He has a link on his website to report issues with his books because he had the person who edited The Cell was too afraid to edit him. And so the book came out and it was full of not only just typos and stuff like that, but full of like plot things that needed to be tightened up. And if you go in being afraid of your author and you're not doing that, then their book is going to come out not great. And that's exactly what happened with The Cell. Is it came out and then Stephen King was like, nope, new rule, report to me if there's issues in my books, because I will get it fixed. Instead of, I mean, if you're him, I'd hate to hear about these editing failures from a magazine or a review or wherever you're hearing about it from, where you're like, what the crap? What do you mean this was misspelled 3 times? You know?
Why didn't you just tell me? Like, come on. You don't need to be coddled.
Right. And nowadays you would be blasted on the internet. Like they would just be like, is this person even trying anymore? And then you would just be like destroyed for 6 months.
Well, Amazon wouldn't even let you do it after a certain point. They flag in your ebooks. They'll flag typos and stuff like that. Are you sure this is right? And you have to go through and be like, yes, it's fine. That's fun as a fantasy writer because the number of things like this is not a word. I'm like, you're right. It's not. Please leave it.
That can't be right because I read so many books now that are the indie authors that I'm just like, how did this even if you write in Word would have caught this, which means you didn't even go through it. Yeah, but like Really, Amazon, are you really trying?
Well, they'll flag them for sure, and they'll ask you to check them. But again, if people are just popping it up, hitting okay, 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 and moving through. Although apparently you can report them, I've heard. I've heard authors bemoaning the fact that someone reported a typo or some such thing, and their book is frozen or paused or
Yeah, I
something
did
like
that a
that
couple
until they
times.
address this problem. And it's like, wow, that's serious over, I wrote "nad" instead of "and." I'm sorry. But that doesn't seem like a bannable offense.
Yeah,
Well,
see, I
no,
didn't
but
know it did that. And I definitely have been one of those things because initially I thought because it was a new thing added in, right? So I thought it was one of those things, it lets the author know
Sure,
because
and I would like to know, right? As an author,
right,
like Stephen King, tell me.
I went to reopen to finish the book and like I couldn't get in. It said the book was temporarily disabled.
Oh
I
no.
was like, oh no.
And you're making a poor author sweat, be like, oh no, I have to fix this within, I forgot what timeline it is. But
It's like 72 hours or something. Yeah, it's crazy.
I think, it's interesting because companies go to those extremes. You got to figure it wasn't one report or it's Amazon, 100 reports or probably even 1,000 reports that caused them to actually go in and make some, programmatic changes to their system. It had to be so bad that they're like, okay, we can't take this traffic anymore. We're going to do this thing. And, Amazon, for its own fun and delightful things, I see why they go about doing stuff like that, because this goes out there, they sell it, and then people are refunding or rejecting, and then they're having to deal with all of that fun, delightful stuff. Yeah, not pleasant at all. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and talk more about fans because I have more questions. We'll be right back.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family owned, brewing small batch grain to bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
Okay, we're back. So let's talk about reviews and fan feedback. How was that when you first started getting actual reviews and stuff like that? Do you read them all?
I try to, and thankfully, mostly they've been good. I don't think I've seen any that have been particularly abysmal or heart-wrenching. So that's been fun. That's good. It's actually, I love getting reviews. I get ridiculously excited about having a review. I'd like it to be a 4 or 5 star, clearly. That would be the best type to get me a nice high. But I'll take what I can get. I like learning. I like seeing what people liked or didn't like, or if there was something I should have done differently or whatever. But it's just that cool moment where you're like, hey, they get it. Oh, they read it. That's even cooler. So I love, love, love getting reviews anywhere. I found one, I remember going through at one point, he was like, I didn't see that one. And I was so excited. I had to announce it to everyone on the social media platforms. It was like a year old or something. And I was like, but I just spotted it. It matters. So fun.
No, it totally does matter. And some people do really well reading reviews and some not so great reading reviews, especially if you get negative reviews. But what about in person? Has anybody come up to you that's read the book and talked about the book to you?
I had one at the Christmas market because I launched right before, I guess, all of COVID's nonsense sort of happened. So I launched in November 2019, my first book. And so initially I was at like Christmas fairs and stuff like that, locally, again, small town. We have a summer's market. And so during periods where we could, we're doing the summer market with the local writing group and all of that. So I'd been out and talking to people about it and the launching. But there was this one man who just absolutely made my day. I didn't catch his name and I'm feeling guilty for that. We were at, I think it was a Christmas market last year, able to finally have people out and coming by and everything. And I happened to spot him like beelining through the crowds between these little aisles, right? Because I am with the Souk Writing Collective, just a sort of a local group of writers who help support each other and put out the anthologies and all this kind of fun stuff. So they had a table there. I was there selling my books and helping others sell their books and everything. Anyway, so he beelines through the crowd, comes up and snatches up the newest book immediately. And I was like, oh, that's book 2, if you want to read book 1. He's like, no, I've read all of your books. I want this one. And I was like, okay. That was just, He was so enthusiastic about being like, yes, I've got the newest one. Celebrant is out now. I'm taking it. He was absolutely thrilled. And it was the first time I've had someone who walked up, not just like, hey, this looks interesting. Maybe I'll try one of the books, or I'll pick one up for my kid or something like that. Or my fellow fantasy reader. But it was the first time I had someone who was like, no, I've read everything you've written. And you got a new one. I want this one. So that was really, really exciting.
Very cool. Did he talk to you at all about parts of the book or anything like that?
A little bit. He told me that the first time he picked up the book, he ended up finishing it in basically 48 hours, which is very complimentary. That was very sweet of him. He was excited to see where the rest of it went. He was talking about how, Raiden was a different character, and that he was really enjoying going down that route, that he'd enjoyed the other ones with Denoran and with Kairon and all of that. But he really liked Tomas, like the new character introduced in Raiden. So he was like really curious to see where this was going to lead. So he was, they said, very enthusiastic about picking up the new book, and of course getting it signed. That was very important to him at the time.
Sorry, did you work on your signature when you first started signing books? How did that go?
I sign differently quite on purpose, because I sign things all the time as a veterinarian, and that's my full, Dr. So-and-so's name. Whereas I do a different signature, just the D Lambert. That's why I go as D when I'm a writer, so that it's D. Lambert. Although one thing I started doing was dating them, because I realized that it might matter. So I have a signature, and I had to figure out, the hardest part was figuring out like a those generic catchphrases or like addresses, when you're not saying, dear Timothy, have fun, whatever kind of stuff. If you don't have those ones and you just want to sign a few, what do you say? I worked on that for a while. I probably overthought it.
What did you come up with?
Enjoy the adventure.
Not bad. Not bad
What is the weirdest thing somebody has asked you to write in a book? Like when you address it to them?
I had one that they had a nickname that they wanted to address it to. And it ended up being something like Squirrely or something like that. It was very different, and I didn't want to ask because it was for an adult. So I'm sure there's a whole story behind it, but I think that was the weirdest one. But most people aren't very specific on their address. They're like, just send it, write it to Meredith or something. And you're like, okay, dear Meredith, enjoy the adventure. And that's it. But I haven't had a lot that have been terribly specific.
Wow. No, and that dating book, the signature is a great idea, because people will be like, look, I got this done in 2021. I met her in a market, because when you're big and famous, everybody's going to be like, she didn't go to markets. Like, that's not it.
One day.
You can't see her there. Chelsea, as I monopolized the first half of the entire podcast, my co-host. Yeah.
So you said you're moving more into like the adult range.
Yeah.
Is it because you got tired of doing young adult, or does your stories like follow the same characters and they have aged?
It wasn't that I got tired of it. It was just the way that the story went, basically. And that goes with being a pantser. You're implying I thought that through. It just happened. But I think honestly, though, the main reason it probably happened was that when I first wrote the Weapons of Espar series, that was one of the first stories I finished. I was 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there. And while they definitely went through various incarnations and hopefully came out better for it, by the time I was writing Tomas's story in The Son of No Man, I was 21, 22. So the character kind of followed me up with that. And so he was older and just farther along in life. So it ended up being a more adult story, as opposed to, finding your place in the world and coming of age and all that kind of stuff. This is very different. This is more about leaving a legacy. So it's more of an adult theme in general. And all of that just went along with it as a result.
No, that makes sense. CR writes young adult, but is about to jump into the realm of adult books for her series.
Yeah, they get dicey.
Are they getting older? Is that what it is for you?
No, it's just each realm has a different genre to it. And so we're going kind of with a darker noir theme in the next one. And young adult can obviously read it. It's not like it's getting super grungy sex scenes or anything. It's a lot more violence. So it'll come with a little warning on it. And all of my characters are pretty much eternal. So like age isn't necessarily why I did young adult. So it's just situational.
Well, that's just it. You can have a young adult main character who's a senior, but you can also have an adult book whose main character is a child. It's not about necessarily just the age of the character. It's more about what are they going through and who's going to relate the most to those experiences.
Well,
Yeah, that's pretty much
exactly.
how it started. It started, with a kind of just like a fun beginning, and then it gets darker. So it's definitely going to be a little bit more mature next realm, a little bit.
A little bit more mature.
It gives you a chance to explore though and have fun. Like you're not telling the same story, that again and again and again, like so many people fall into. This is the formula that works, so I'm just going to keep doing it. Whereas I'd rather see something that's new and different again,
So what books are really challenging you now as a reader?
Oh, right now I am for the first time ever reading the Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I'm just, for some reason, have never read it. And I know it's been around forever and everybody knows it now, mostly because I guess of the series on the TV. But I'm actually reading that right now and I'm finding it very difficult, which is a weird thing to say because she's a good writer. She really is. But it seems just a bit disjointed and I'm having trouble kind of getting into it. Everyone loves Jamie and I'm like, he's a bit of a jerk. No, he's a total jerk regularly. He's also very endearing and I get that, but he just annoys me.
Well, see, if you watch Vampire Diaries, everybody loves Damon, and he literally kills all these people that Elena's, and everybody's like, Damon's the greatest.
He's so devoted. No, he's violent. What are you talking about? I'm scared for her safety. Like,
exactly.
They should be scared for their safety. She's the most
like,
iconic of them all.
In love with this person. Anyway, that's my challenge currently. I'm trying to get through it. But it is, I mean, the premise of it, the story is pretty good, but it does go into the total grungy, like originally the sex scenes were quite tame. They kind of alluded to things and like hand moved down and that's it. And then you see the reaction. You're like, oh, I know where that went, but it doesn't spell it out. And then halfway through, no, there's no question. It's quite explicit. So it was a weird transition to watch from a very objective perspective, like putting my writer's hat on and seeing it from a writer's perspective. I was like, you changed your style as you went, and maybe it's because you discovered it more, or once you got the hook in, you don't have to worry about it. I don't know, but it was it's been an interesting it's been an interesting read so far.
Do you finish all these books? Like, are you a finisher? Are you a finisher?
I am a finisher. There's like 2 or 3 books I have put down and not read, like not finished. I can't tell you the name of them because I honestly forgot. But I had one that just disgusted me and I had it up to here and I just put it down and I didn't go back. But no, I generally speaking will always finish a book that I start. I think I'm maturing to the point where that may not be the case anymore.
I hope you do, because it's a gigantic waste of time. That's
it is.
What I
if
tell
you don't
everybody.
like a book, I feel like you should, but the thing is, I usually love reading so much that I do like most books. Like I actually enjoy them, if not from a, fantastical, just escapism perspective, but also just from a, informatory, like I'm learning from these kind of things or seeing what they did and what they did differently and why is that interesting. And like I love reading just in general. So for the most part, I will enjoy most books, even if it's, just nonfictions about parenting techniques or something. Like I will still enjoy reading the book. So there's a few ones that will just disgust me to the point where I won't, but I haven't run into a lot of those. I'm pretty careful though. I don't do horror. I have an imagination that will take that horror and it will keep me up for months. So I can't do the horror, and
any of my books.
I have never. I'm sorry, but I won't either because it will disturb me. And I guess I'm just one of those people who, when you see it, it really becomes quite real in my head. I don't know if that's like everyone or if it's just my brain fixates on things that it sees in writing, and so it's not safe to read horror. Thriller is pretty tricky as well, and I cannot handle child endangerment anymore. That's the hormones. As soon as any child's in danger, I'm tearing up. A cartoon one the other day I was watching, and the cartoon child was dying, and I was like teary-eyed. It was just a disaster. I never used to cry in movies or anything before. I was never that emotional, but now child endangerment, I'm like, no, I'm out.
No, that makes sense. I think that's true for a lot of mothers and parents and stuff like that.
Writers got to know what they're doing.
and killing, I'm just going to say this, killing dogs. So
Mm.
you're a vet, killing dogs like that. Not that animals don't get killed, but for whatever reason, most especially dogs.
Dogs, yeah.
Do not kill dogs in
Don't
books.
kill the dog in your story or you will get hate mail. Like it's epic. I once saw a commentary that was that there was 2 articles run in the newspaper at the same time. One was about a man who'd murdered his wife. And the other one was about a man who'd drug a dog behind his car. And the newspaper got like 10 times more stuff about the dog than about the wife. And that's just people, you know, there's a website for it now too as well. Does the dog die? I think that's the name of the website. I might be wrong. But if you're ever in a movie and you're watching and you're like, oh no, there's a sweet dog, but does the dog die? Look it up on this website. They will tell you, because people get bona fide angry if you get most of the way through and they kill the dog, right? That they're going to walk out of that theater. They're so mad.
Yeah, no, completely. I got to ask a vet question though,
It's
because
inevitable.
yeah, well, it's actually how you arrived at the vet thing, because I say this a lot. Having nannied a ton of kids, and you know, I have my own kids, and I feel like almost every child, but mainly female child, goes through the I want to be a vet stage. Usually right around 12 years old, 10 to 12 years old, somewhere in there, the I want to be a vet, right? And then,
caring,
you know,
I
they
like
were a
them, they're cute.
ballerina. Yeah. When did you start that journey?
I didn't do it as a super, you know, the classic story from vets is like, I always wanted to be a vet. And so I did, and I worked hard and all. Well, mostly what happened was every time I had to decide for a moment what I was going to do with my life, veterinary medicine came up. So career prep says you have to do work experience. And I'd be like, well, I'll do it at the vet. I need to get a summer job. Well, I'll do it at the vet. So every time I just kind of gravitated back to the vet. And then I finished my first, like I actually was 3/4 of the way through my first degree doing bachelor's of science, because my brain is very science oriented. That's just the way I am. My whole family's scientists. So that's, I guess, how we're hardwired. So I was at the University of Victoria doing a bachelor's of science. And I got to year 3, just about to start year 4. And I'm thinking, well, I better figure this out. I'm about to graduate next year and I need to decide what I'm going to do with it afterwards. Right. So then, you know, the crux comes and I have to make up my mind. So I went and I volunteered over Christmas at a vet clinic, because that's what I always came back to. And, you know, I loved the mix of science, you know, thought you have to problem solve, you have to use the facts that you've got, but also talking to people, engaging them, educating, all of that came together. I liked that every day was different. You didn't have to do the same day in, day out. You actually got to, you never knew what you'd see in between, you know, the next day. So I asked them to be my sponsor or my reference for applications. And I applied my first year with very little experience, which means I was not high on the list to get in that year. I worked the next year to get my experience up. I was number 19 out of a system that took the first 15. And I missed it by that much from BC. So I then decided, so help me, once I decide I'm going to do something, publishing's an example of that. Once I decide I'm going to do something, I go and do it. And so I applied abroad and decided I was going to do, and I went to school in Edinburgh and got my degree.
Oh, wow.
And then came back.
That's very cool though.
That's
So
awesome.
how long were you over there?
I was in Scotland for 4 years. I got into a couple different vet schools, but I went to Edinburgh because my main mentor, Dr. Smith, who's over at Anacare, I loved his style of medicine. The fact that he was honest with people about what to expect. He really focused on communicating with them. I loved it. So I figured if that's where he went, that must be a good school. And he told me that if I went to Glasgow, he'd never talk to me again, because there's a rivalry between Glasgow and Edinburgh, a good old healthy rivalry. Anyway, so I was there for 4 years, got to travel parts of Europe as a bonus, got my degree from the school whose graduates started the schools in Canada. So I went to the motherland, basically, for vet school.
Oh, wow. That's very cool, though. And then the writing. So you were 17 when you started writing?
When I started, finished my first novel. I mean, I have this terrible story from when I was 4 that my mom just gave me for Christmas that she kept from when I was 4 that was like, once upon a time, there was a princess. She lived in a castle. She had a dog. She loved her mom. The end. That was my first story.
Tell me more. That's a Netflix
I-
series.
Where is the second book?
It's a short
What
story.
happens
but
with the
you know,
dog?
flash fiction. We'll just call it flash.
What kind of dog?
And does the dog die?
Yes.
No. we
No,
wouldn't kill the dog.
no, don't say that.
I'm
No,
just saying, it just took so dark.
No. Anyway, so I've been writing forever, but I finished the first book when I was 17. But no, I actually wrote the Son of No Man series while I was in vet school. I had planned to stop writing in vet school because I was like, I'm not going to have time for that, silliness, basically. I need to focus on my studies and devote my time to, studying and learning and all these extra stuff. And I went 1 week without writing or editing or doing anything. And I legitimately got the shakes and anxiety attacks. Like I went through what is equivalent to a withdrawal from writing. My brain needed it because if my brain doesn't have to focus on over there, it's winding itself up and getting all panicky about stuff. So this is my therapy. It's like, no, don't worry about whether or not the car is going to crash. Kittible's still stuck in this well over here. Could you please figure out how to get him out? Right. So just redirecting to it. And so when I stopped writing, I got really, my mental health was terrible for that week period. And when it finally clicked as to what was happening, I turned around and just was like, screw this, I'm going to write. Fine. I'll just fit it in between stuff. Studies are priority because this is why I'm here, but I will write. It's clearly important to me. And so I did. I wrote the first book, Ride In. I wrote in about 8 months, the first 8 months of vet school. And the series was completed by the end of my 4 years, the 6-book series.
Yes, that's amazing in and of itself, which is awesome. And I think it's interesting that you say that because I think for overthinkers, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I am an overthinker.
I'm an overthinker. I do not, and I make no bones about it. Totally.
Yeah, I will all the way down the path, down the rabbit hole, through the rabbit hole, into I'm gone. And I think it's true that writing helps you kind of just get off of that path because you have to focus on doing this other thing. And it is very relaxing when you're able it's very relaxing to be thinking about those things. Of course, mine are very dark
I was
things.
going to say, I don't know how
things,
relaxing yours are if you're murdering people.
She gets out some of that repressed anger is what it is.
Well,
put certain people's faces on there or something and just.
Well, what's interesting is I do HR for a living. I've talked about that on the show. And the things that people will do, I could never write in a story. We've talked about this, fictional things, non-fictional things people will do, people will do in real life. If I put them in a story, nobody would ever believe that story was accurate.
The stranger than fiction problem.
Yes. And so when writing my stories, what's neat about it is I go, how do I build up to this? And my stories don't have happy endings. So how do I end this where I'm invoking the right emotions that I'm trying to invoke? Nobody goes, oh my God, I read that story and it made me feel so good. And I was that's not the end result of reading Erica Lance. It's just not. So, but for me, it's that part because it is horror, because you have to put the suspense in it. It's not gore, it's actually horror. And there is a difference between there's blood everywhere. I mean, you see that in movies and stuff like that too, where I like a horror movie. I don't like a gore fest movie. If it's just going to be that everywhere, I'm not interested. So for me, it's the figuring out how to lead up to it and how to put the right things in that make it challenging and relaxing to read. Although I'm not going to lie, I have scared the shit out of myself and had to get up and walk away from the computer when I'm writing in the middle of the night. And then I'm go, all of a sudden I'm hearing noises off and I'm like, great, my house is haunted. I'm leaving. Let's go. I'm burning it down. It's all just
probably a good sign. It's probably a very good
Cleanse
sign.
it with fire. I think the other thing is I tried to branch out and read a couple horror stories. I've read a little bit of Stephen King and I've done something. Some of the things that get me with some of the newer horror writers is it's just gross.
It's like they had to come up with a new way of saying it even freakier.
Yeah, it's not scary. It's not even that. It's just why?
Well, and I think that's kind of going towards the gore thing is I saw that. I remember one of the first times I saw that was, Nightmare on Elm Street was a gory movie when it first came out, and it was terrifying. I mean, they got a little cheesier, but it was a terrifying movie. Something was attacking you while you were sleeping, right? Like this was, and there was dead bodies and stuff like that. But I remember Cabin Fever was a movie that came out. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it was a movie, and there's this one scene, and it's about this disease people get, but she literally, like grabs her thigh and it comes off during this like disease thing. And I'm sitting there watching, it's in the very beginning of the movie. It's like the opening scene where they show you what's happening and then lead up to how everybody figures out what's happening. And I literally was like, nope. And not because I got grossed out or something. I was just like, this is not interesting to me. Trying to gross me out is not interesting to me. Now it's trying to scare the crap out of me. That is interesting to me. Like that tingling, like, thing.
Yep. You start getting the adrenaline spike.
Yeah,
Yes.
get your heart pounding for sure during those ones.
Exactly. And that's what I want is like I was talking to some writers who were writing about a haunted house thing, like a haunted house, not a haunted house, but a haunted like trail thing that's been in place for years and years. So they wrote a fiction book based on the characters in this haunted trail thing. And I said, and they've gone to it for several years. They go around and go to these. And I was like, why do you want to write? Why do you like this? Why do you want to write? Do you get scared? And they're like, we get scared all the time. But that's what's fun about it is that feeling right about when you're like the adrenaline, right when you're about to be scared. They're like, that's what's so amazing about it. And I was like, that would be cool. That's what I want to invoke. I want people to read my book and then not sleep at night. By the way, that's what I put in my book is things like sweet dreams. Hope you have a good night's sleep. Like
right at the end. Thank you and sweet dreams.
Exactly. Okay. Shameless self-promotion time, Dee. Let's talk about what you have coming out and how to find you in your books.
Okay, well, I believe we've got the third book coming out in May for the Son of No Man series. That is Northlander. The cover is just been released, so it's all over my social media right now. So find me, it's Dlambertauthor is pretty much what you'll find me everywhere. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of that. Books are, and of course the website, dlambertauthor.com. It's probably the easiest place to launch off of because it's got all the links there, all the books, all the series, all, if you want to pick up the audiobook, brand new. That's so exciting. Ryden has its own audiobook now, which I'm looking forward to hearing Celebrants. So that's going to be fun. But all of them are, sorry?
It's coming soon.
It's coming soon. But yeah, very exciting to have the audiobook as well. But it's all linked now through the website. It's probably the easiest spot to get them all.
Do you have a newsletter people can sign up for?
Absolutely. If you go to the website, you'll get a little prompt at some point, or just contact me independently. That'll work too. I send out a newsletter once a month. Usually it's the first Tuesday of the month. I throw in some deals and stuff like that. So cross promotion with other authors, so you can get some new authors to learn and see some, 99 cents or free books and stuff like that. But I usually include as well just a little blurb about where we're at, what's happening. Things like, the newsletter crew got to see the cover first. That was released just last Tuesday, and they were first in line to be able to see that cover. So sign up for the newsletter to get all of the updates as they become available.
Very, very cool. It was wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Very much enjoyed it. It was great to talk to everybody.
Very cool. Okay, guys, this has been Drinking with Authors. I've been your host, Erica Lance. My co-host has been the amazing C.R. Rice. Our sponsor is Skunk Brothers Spirits, DWA 10, and you can get this chocolate cordial, which, by the way, was amazing in my hot chocolate. Not gonna lie, but you know what else I realized this would be great in is like a White Russian with like Kahlua and vodka and milk and stuff like that.
I was thinking a milkshake. Ever since you did the like hot chocolate, I was like, I wonder how that would be in like a milkshake. Like you just don't tell the person or anything, just like make it up. Like, let's have some milkshakes tonight.
I'm going to do that to Chelsea next time I see her in person. That's what's going to happen.
That's fine.
Our amazing guest has been Dee Lambert, and we will see you guys next time.